Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 2nd of September, so happy September, and we're approaching autumn, which means we're also approaching mud season, which should start around mid-October. And that means there's about a month and a half until we reach that point. But anyway, let's look at the front lines for the 2nd of September, starting out with the situation around Kherson. So, first thing that needs to be mentioned is that Russian sources report that the Ukrainians have sent 4 groups across the Dnieper River that landed in an area that is to the northwest of the village of Pitstepne. Pitstepne is over here, and the new Ukrainian landings occurred around here. This is not supposed to be an offensive activity. It's supposed to be a DRG operation, and they're now landing in a new area, and I'm sure they're going to rotate their forces on a daily basis. But it does show that they're now beginning to increase their activity in the region around Kozachi Lahari, because previously the Ukrainians attacked this village specifically. They had a presence across the Kanka River, and they tried attacking Kozachi Lahari from the west, so that would be like around here where they were trying to attack. Eventually, they were pushed back, and then for a couple of weeks, we didn't really hear much from that area. Now the Ukrainians are increasing their presence in the same region, but they're landing in areas that previously they had not tried to land in. And this is being done again at 124th TDF, and the 126th TDF from Odessa is also supporting the 124th, but they have not landed their own forces across the river in recent weeks, to my knowledge. But they are in the region, so they can be of use in the future. Now, if we go a bit further to the west, to the Holopristan sector, as I call it, because Holopristan is the largest Russian city in the region that they have under their control in Kherson. So in this region, you have Russian reports that 2 Ukrainian boats attempted to land on the island of Mali Bilohrudy, which is an island over here where the arrows are pointing towards. And the Russians report that they were able to destroy both boats. I can't confirm that, but it does seem likely that Ukrainians are increasing their DRG operations on these islands, and this is sort of in sync with a lot of the reports we've got from Ukrainian side and previous Russian reports. And it is also par for the course that sometimes you will have some boats that get damaged because this is an open area, this is in a valley. The areas that are more inland, both on the Russian and Ukrainian side of the river, are in higher elevation, so it is easier to spot these DRGs when they're going on their speedboats. So sometimes there will be damage that is incurred, but I don't know if this specific case actually is true. Now, around Verbove, the Russian sources, and I want to specifically mention the Rybar map, they're reporting on an assault by the 82nd Air Assault Brigade on Verbove's western flank, which would be in this direction. And Rybar's map is very interesting because their map shows that a lot of the fields that are to the east of the anti-tank ditch is located over here. They show that a lot of these fields that are to the east of it are actually under Ukrainian control. So their map shows that the Ukrainians were able to reach all the way to this area over here, very, very close to Russia's manned defense line, and then they were eventually pushed back from a hedgerow in the region, and the Ukrainian assault was eventually repelled. And this was all done by the infantry, not by any sort of armored column, according to Rybar's reports. But I can't confirm that their statements are true, obviously. There wasn't any footage to back up any sort of major Ukrainian assault in this direction, but it does sort of lend credence to the idea that fighting in this region is uptaking, not just from the northwest of Verbove over here, but also from the western flank directly in this region over here. And the reason why we're seeing an increase in fighting on the western flank of Verbove is because the Ukrainians are trying to advance in 2 specific directions. And we've talked about this before. One direction where the Ukrainians are trying to advance is directly to the south of the fields that they captured, because the Ukrainians, they captured a lot of fields that are to the east of Verbotine. Verbotine is over here, and then they captured all of these eastern fields, as I call them. So they want to continue pushing in this direction to secure Hill 166. Hill 166, it spans from this rectangle over here to this other rectangle over here. So a large chunk of Hill 166 is in front of Russia's defenses in this region, such as their anti-tank ditches and their Dragon's Teeth. So while Russia may have forces in the region in front of these defenses, it is less manned and it is easier for the Ukrainians to access than going across the defenses to occupy positions in the hill in this region over here, where I have the maps pointing towards. So the Ukrainians are attacking directly to the south over here, and also to the east over here. And this is again corroborated by what Rybar was saying about those attacks. And it's also corroborated by a video that I'm going to show you guys over here. This is a video that a Ukrainian soldier filmed. He was walking along a dirt road. And in the video, you could see two abandoned Russian tanks. I don't know if they were destroyed or anything like that, but they're on the road. And the Ukrainian soldier, he shows the entire countryside that is surrounding the defenses, that is surrounding Verbove. And it does give us a lot of insight as to how the front line actually looks like. Because in that video, and I will show it in a moment, the Ukrainian soldier is seen walking alone. Nobody's firing upon him, nobody's shelling him. In the background, you can't hear videos, you can hear sound of shelling, you can't hear the sound of gunfire, you can't hear that he's being targeted at all. It seems like he's just walking around and he's just going unscathed. And that would indicate that the Russian positions are not hundreds of meters away from this geolocated marker, because this is the specific geolocation, but perhaps a kilometer or two away, because that would fit in with the idea that the Russians have withdrawn back to their manned trench line over here. Because if you take a measuring stick and measure the geolocation of the video versus the Russian trench that's manned, that's about 2.6 kilometers. So I think that's a realistic description of the situation, that Russia has put most of their men along this manned trench line, and that they've withdrawn most of them back from the open fields around here where I'm going over with these blue rectangles. I think they've withdrawn most of those troops full back into Verbove, or at least a bit back to the east. But they may still have some Russian forward elements that are operating in the fields around here. And those ones at least were not present in the video, which shows that the Ukrainians do have a pretty good firm grip over the fields that are to the west of the anti-tank ditch and of the Dragon's Teeth, which means they have the foundation to cross over these Dragon's Teeth and over these ditches on a broader front, and with infantry, of course, not with any sort of vehicles yet. But that leads me to my second point, which is about the elevation in this region. So here you see the Ukrainian POV. You can see the two damaged tanks. And now he's going to turn his video around and he will show the Russian fortifications. Just give it a few seconds. And here you can see in the horizon, you could see the Dragon's Teeth. It is very hard to get a good glimpse of it, but I will try to mark it. Okay, here you see it. So in blue, here are the you have the Dragon's Teeth. And in front of that, you probably have the anti-tank ditch, but you can't really see it in the video because obviously it's dug underground, so it's not visible from the area where the soldier is filming, but I guess it would be in the area around where these red lines are being drawn. The key point is that these defenses that were constructed by Russia, they're located on a valley. So even the Ukrainian soldier, he's walking through open fields in an area that is on pretty low elevation, even he has a good sight overlooking those defenses, which means that as he approaches it and as other Ukrainian infantrymen will try to approach it, they will be crossing through an area that is on very, very low elevation compared to the Russian positions. So let's just look at where Russia is located. You could see on the horizon this hill. It's very hard to make out, but the hill would be located around here in the areas where I have the rectangle marked in red. And that's probably where the Russian positions are located, on Hill 166. So let's look again and compare this to the map. So Hill 166, as I said before, it's not just over here, but it also spans to the area over here. So the video in the area that I showed, that was a hill that Russian positions are probably located on, they may be around the area over here. So while Russia may have most of their men in this region located in the manned trench or even further east in Verbove, if they move some of their men, which I'm sure they do on a daily basis, forward a bit to the west, to the areas over here, these two different lines that I have in red, if they move into that area, then they will be located on a Hill 166. And once they reach that area, they'll be able to pretty effectively fire upon any sort of Ukrainian force that is crossing over the anti-tank ditch and the Dragon's Teeth, which is a possibility that Ukraine has to take into account when they launch these attacks, because they will be in a valley and it will be easier to spot those forces as they cross over and easier to fire upon them. I know I do this in every video, but I think it's important to show the elevation map so it doesn't get confusing when I talk about all of these different topographies. So the area where you see 440 feet, that's where the Ukrainian soldier filmed the video around this area. And you could see that the Ukrainians really want to secure the heights over here. They really want to get control of this area, and they are able to do this. They could be able to do this because these fortifications, the heights are not fortified. These heights are in front of the fortifications that the Russians set up in the region. The Russians set up their fortifications just to the south of these hills around here. And then the other part of Hill 166, which is behind the fortifications, is located around here. And that's the area that the Russians could sort of operate on to fire upon the Ukrainian forces as they attempt to cross over the anti-tank ditch in this direction. Another issue for the Ukrainian forces in the region is that their forward operating base is now going to be Robotyne. If they want to continue pushing south further past Robotyne and Verbove, they're going to need to use Robotyne as this sort of coordination point for supplies and for all of the different brigades in the region. And so what you need to have is protection of your flanks. So the eastern flank, at least, is pretty secure because the Ukrainians have control of all of these fields over here. And the issue here is that there's a lot of mines that need to be cleared out in order to pave way for further Ukrainian vehicles to send equipment and reinforcements through this area. That's going to be done. Meanwhile, further to the west, the Russians still control the heights that overlook Robotyne from the west, and they're looking towards the east. Now, to be fair, in certain areas of Robotyne, especially the southern part of the village, the elevation is very similar under Ukrainian control versus the heights that are under Russian control that are just to the west of Robotyne. And again, Robotyne is over here if you aren't aware. But the truth is, a lot of the roads that lead into Robotyne, there's actually only one, I believe, one paved road that leads into Robotyne that Ukraine has under their control. There's another one that comes in from Verbove, but part of that's not under Ukrainian control at the moment. So the Ukrainians really are relying on one paved road and then all the open fields to the east to supply Robotyne like this. And that one road, part of it is on pretty low elevation compared to the Russian heights that are over here, over here, over here, over here, over here, etc., etc. And that means that for a certain period of time, they are funneled into this one road and could be fired upon by the Russian forward elements. So Ukraine does need to also look at their western flank. I know they're pushing on the eastern flank, but also the western flank is important. Now, before we move on, here is just a view of the fire map. This is from August 31st, so it is about outdated. But I looked at NASA's FIRMS map, and there was no fires whatsoever in the region around Robotyne or Verbove. So that is pretty interesting. I don't know what to make of that. I've never really used FIRMS as a reliable source for the front lines just because of all the variation. But here you have Sentinel-2 imagery from a couple of days ago, which shows the hotspots of the Ukrainian shelling. You could see that the Ukrainians were shelling Verbove itself over here. They were shelling areas that may be a bit to the northwest of Verbove, or maybe that's Russian artillery, who knows. They were shelling areas that are to the south of Verbove, which would be over here, where the manned trench is located. And a lot of their shelling was concentrated on Tarasivka, which is a village that is pretty close to Verbove, but I would say that's an area where you have a lot of Russian units coordinating. It's a supply hub that sends a lot of equipment. There's a lot of roads that are branching out from it that are leading towards Verbove, for example. So it is sort of like striking the rear, striking some of the ammo dumps in that area, probably striking some of the artillery positions there. That's probably what Ukraine was looking for. And you could see on the map that there were some fires, at least in that village. Now, something that I think is very important to mention is that while myself and many others have been fixating on the defensive fortifications that were built that could be seen by visible satellite imagery, that doesn't mean that these are the entire defenses that Russia built over the entire course of the past year. There are many more Russian defenses that we don't see in visible satellite imagery that are not marked on the map. what you're seeing over here with these green lines, because these green lines are what I use to mark Russian defenses and any kind of Russian defense. It could be a trench, it could be a ditch, and then people might mix it up and believe that it's trench, but it's not just trenches. There's many other defenses over here. Like as I said previously, this is an anti-tank ditch. But what I want to get at here is that there is this misconception that the Ukrainians have only now started attacking Russian defenses, but they have been attacking Russian defenses from the beginning of the counteroffensive. So if we look at Robotyne, for example, you'll see that there are some trenches in this region. And so, yeah, the Ukrainians had to overrun some of them. But this is not the entirety of the defenses that Ukraine overran. They didn't just have to take over these trenches over here, this one over here, and pass through these ones over here. In every single tree line and every single hedgerow, you have a Russian defense in some way, shape, or form. In each tree line around Robotyne, for instance, and I'll mark every single one so you get an idea of the areas I'm referring to, all of these areas over here, you had Russian ATGM crews that were waiting for Ukrainian vehicles that were trying to advance in and around Robotyne. You had machine gun crews, you had sniper nests, you have dugouts, and a lot of these dugouts, they're so small or they're underground. A lot of them you can't see from satellite imagery. That doesn't mean that these areas are just open and that Ukraine can pass through them. These areas are still very, very fortified, and Russians are using the hedgerows and tree lines for concealment. And that's where they have a lot of their forces concentrated that push back the Ukrainians, or were pushing back the Ukrainians for months before they were eventually able to secure Robotyne. So it's not like Ukraine has been only beginning to attack these defenses now. They were forced to overrun a lot of them that I just marked in red with those lines over the course of the entire counteroffensive since its beginning in early June. Now, last thing is that we're continuing to receive reports from both sides that the Russians are moving in reinforcements to the front line. A lot of them are being moved into Novoprokopivka, where recently there's been reports of increased fighting in the area to the north of Novoprokopivka as Ukraine tries to increase pressure in that direction, but so far no breakthrough past the northern trenches north of Novoprokopivka. But a lot of these reinforcements are coming in from the 76th Air Assault Division, as we talked about in a previous video, and from the 7th Air Assault Division. In another video that I plan to do in a few days, I want to do a breakdown of every single Russian unit, like their troop composition and the amount of men that they have located. So just keep an eye out for that in the future. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.